So let's talk about the Clippers. And the Clippers are a team which recently have, you know, been in the spotlight of the NBA. And they've been in the spotlight in the NBA for a few years. And I want to dive deep into this. The Clippers are a franchise which, before 2020, were just kind of trash. They've always been a franchise who has had great periods and then horrible periods. And they've really been one of the worst franchises in NBA history when it comes to maximizing the players which they're given. Back in the days when they were the Buffalo Bills, they had Bob McAdoo, which was an MVP for them, and they couldn't get any championships with him. Through history, they've had great players like Chris Paul. They had Lob City with Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan. They've had the best six man of all time in Lou Williams. And they've just had players which maybe could have contributed to a championship, or at least could have competed, to maybe just try to get a championship. But they've never done that. And this has been the story of the Clippers' lives for a while. So in 2020, right, when there was a push, the Clippers decided to go all in. Their owner, Steve Ballmer, had, I think, recently bought the team. And he is a person who has a lot of money. Steve Ballmer has $100 billion of net worth. So he basically said, I don't care what you have to do. I don't care how much money you have to spend. Just make my team good and make people go to the games. And they did. The first thing that they did was get Kawhi Leonard, which signed there. But that was not the end of it. They basically restructured their entire team, right? And it looked like the best roster assembled in a while. You had Markieff Morris, you had Kawhi Leonard, you had Paul George, you had Patrick Beverly, you had Eric Gordon. There's been a lot of guys. You have Ivica Zubac, you have Robert Covington, and there's basically the Clippers just have a lot of guys who are very good and are top tier role players who play defense and play offense. And really, that got to its peak in 2021 and 2022, where they had the best teams that they've had in a while. But the problem is with these teams in this depth is that they've never done anything. In 2020, people thought that in the playoffs they would be competing for a championship. And when the playoffs came around, Kawhi and Paul George looked like two of the worst players on the planet, breaking shots off the backboard, missing wide open shots, looking completely gassed and out of confidence, and being one of the worst duos. Kawhi was better than Paul George, but Paul George was horrible and looking like one of the worst duos. And then the Clippers decided, you know what, we're going to stick with these guys. Even though this just happened, we're going to keep going. Because they had signed them for big contracts. And now I want you to think about that. Right now, what they have done is that they got Kawhi Leonard on free agency. They traded their life away. They traded like 5 first round draft picks and like 4 young stars just to get Paul George. And now they're in a situation where, since they've traded so much and spent so much money on these guys, they need to win something, right? Or at least they need to do something. The next year came around, it was 2021. And this looked like the year. They were playing phenomenal. There were no big injuries. And when the playoffs came around, the Clippers, especially Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, they weren't getting injured until the Western Conference Finals. They had cruised as Kawhi was putting up a 30-point masterclass every game with 60% from the field. But in the end, what ended up happening was that Kawhi Leonard got injured in the Western Conference Finals versus the Suns, which forced no, he got injured in the second round series against the Jazz, which forced him, to sit out the entire series with the Suns, which they would have won if Kawhi was there. Now, what we can see from that is that that's the second year where this team doesn't succeed. So let's keep going. So when 2022 comes around, and you might think, oh, okay, there's going to be a season where there's no injuries. But in 2022, Kawhi didn't play any of the regular season games. He didn't due to the injury that he had last season and rehabbing that and making better. And the Clippers, even though they have a good coach, one of the best coaches in Tyronn Lue, a championship coach, which is he's or at least been really good, right? Even though they have good role players and they have a star in Paul George when Kawhi's not around, if we're being honest, they don't have enough to win that many games if Kawhi's not there. So when the 2023 season came around, no, the 2022 season came around, Kawhi didn't play. Right? He sat out. The Clippers didn't make the playoffs. Boo-hoo. And then they just, looked like another failed season for the Clippers. All these seasons they made some moves, and when 2023 came around, that's the real year. Kawhi came back. Boom. He was torching the league. He was phenomenal. He was hitting game winners. But he was playing barely any minutes. And he was getting brought back. Like, normally when a player comes back, he'll just take up his starting spot and play the amount of minutes that he used to. Kawhi wasn't. Kawhi was coming off the bench for a lot of this year. He was playing like 20 minutes a game. He was playing just to get his body right and just seeing if he could play. And in my opinion, even though that's good, I like that strategy because there could be a fragile body. But Kawhi Leonard, as a superstar player, should be able to play after rehabbing an injury for a year and a half. I'm sorry, but you're a star player. You need to play. And then eventually he got to playing until, he load managed, and then he played, and then he load managed enough to get the Clippers into the playoffs, right? And until finally, the first round of the playoffs came around. They won the first game. They lost the second game. And then in the second game, when Kawhi Leonard was averaging 30 on incredible efficiency, he got injured again. And in my opinion, that is the story of the Clippers' lives. The Clippers recently have been one of the teams which they put all of their money, assets, and their time into developing this group to win a championship, that they have completely forgotten about that this group has many deficiencies which they cannot fix. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are both very injury prone. Their supporting cast cannot make it to the playoffs without them, and they have a serious problem with positioning and the way that they run their team, because even though they are a good franchise, they need to realize that maybe the Kawhi Leonard and Paul George experiment doesn't work. I like the Clippers and I like what they're doing, but in my opinion, for the past years, they've been a team which has consistently just been disappointing. And honestly, when is this going to stop? Right? Like, I understand that it's easy to talk about the Clippers and talk about a team which hasn't done anything, but we're talking about an entire organization who put almost $200 million a year into helping these guys, into making a better roster, and into investing in a good stock for their players. And they can't even get a healthy, full, like, regular season into NBA finals. They cannot get a healthy season. And in my opinion, that's crazy. And it's unfortunate for the Clippers. So yeah,